Have you ever seen a YouTube reaction video? These are the videos on YouTube where it's just a person or a couple people. Sometimes it's a full bar, or it's a couple people on a couch, and they're just watching a video game, a movie, a song, a TV show, anything. And we watch them, and sometimes we'll watch the video itself as well that they're watching. And these videos are popular, very popular. One that I watched a while back where some Game of Thrones, when I was into Game of Thrones and I didn't want it to end. So I went and I saw there was these reactions, and I could see little clips or even parts of an episode that were edited together from these YouTube videos. And they were getting millions of views. This Obi-Wan Kenobi, 23,000 views. Game of Thrones reaction at Burlington Bar. Half of an episode. 9.3 million views. 1.8 million views. John Wick, 235,000 views. 1.7 million views. Even the smaller ones are probably from videos and groups that have very little views in general. And even they get a couple thousand views just for throwing them up there. But again, you have 190,000 views and 1.5 million views. Just over and over and over again. A lot of times the same episode is just getting hundreds of thousands, millions of views over and over and over again. People are watching them. Probably the same people. Some of the same people are watching them over and over and over again. Why? Why do we love reaction videos so much? I first fell in love with reaction videos during the pandemic. I was sitting around lonely. I didn't know what to do. So I started watching reaction videos. Felt a little bit less lonely. I mean, that's one thing I think why we watch it. So today we're going to be discussing not only why we watch reaction videos, I'm going to give you a couple of reasons that a magazine that claims to be scientific based has for why we do this. But also I'm going to be reading a poem. Now this is a little bit of a longer poem. It's a short-ish poem, but it's a good, I think, 7 stanzas. It's a very famous poem. It's a poem written in the 18th century, late 18th century, so 1798. And I think in this poem, we get profound reasons for why we love reaction videos. Something universal about people, humans. And I also want to show some of the inadequacy of science in explaining these kinds of phenomena. Now, by the way, I have to admit that I have not found perhaps the most profound scientific magazine that explains why we like them. But I do think it's indicative the way that this answers the question of why we like reaction videos so much is very indicative of the way a lot of people think. And it's improper for trying to answer some of these questions. And to answer some of these questions, we need to turn to the poets and the philosophers. They have more profound and better answers. So this is just a Ars Technica magazine, the science behind the insane popularity of react videos on YouTube. And this was 2016, by the way. I didn't even realize that until just now. So maybe there's some that are newer that are better because reaction videos have only grown in popularity from what I can see. So one of the things, we'll just read a couple aspects of it real quickly. One of the things it says is the possible mirror in our brains. So this is giving us a kind of technical, here's the fiber optics, the material, the wires, and you're wired this way. So it kind of happens in that manner. So you see someone else reacting a certain way, and that gives you some kind of shot to the arm, your neurons fire, and voila, that's why you like them. And I think there's some validity. I mean, it's possible that something there's going on, but it should be a very dissatisfying answer to you. Like, okay, so you're saying I'm just programmed to enjoy that? Well, is there a deeper answer? Is that just explaining the material that makes it possible for me to feel that? Another answer, which they call scientific, and it's like, okay, maybe, is binging on emotions, they call it. Empathy may be another reason React videos are so easy to watch. And, again, sure, sometimes if you've ever felt in a mood, and there's even on Spotify a whole playlist like mood music, right? And you want to stay in a mood, even if that mood is sad, you want to be sad. You want to experience that further. Okay, great. That's one reason. Again, that seems to be pretty surface level, though. It seems to be saying, well, you want to because you want to. Okay, I get it because it feels good. But why does it feel good? Is there anything else that we get out of this that is enjoyable to us? And then the last one, again, not very scientific, is hey, you're just like me, is to see that there are people out there like you. And again, that to me is also relevant to, when I felt lonely. It's like, oh yeah, there are people who like this. I really enjoyed the Game of Thrones, and I looked around a lot of friends I have here, and surprisingly, a lot of them hadn't watched the show. There's not a lot of fans in my circle here. And I thought that was interesting. And, not to say that there's none, but there wasn't groups. So when I would see like this Burlington bar that I showed you, that's a great little, oh, hey, look, here's a whole bar of people that get together every, week, every Sunday, and they watched this thing. And you can actually, if you click on this, the producer is Sean Tank Top, and you can go through the whole series, basically, episode by episode, and with them watch the show. And watch them watch the show, and you can also watch the show. Now, I have to admit, I have a couple of favorites of my own. Diegesis is a channel that I like, and they have people that they react to movies like Fury, which I love. There's also Popcorn in Bed, which is a cute one that's also fun. And it got me thinking about, why the heck do I like these? I mean, yeah, okay, so it's cute girls. That's an easy answer, but that's not the only reason. There's lots of cute girls all over the place. I mean, that's not the reason. I really love the Burlington Bar one. It wasn't just cute girls, a whole bunch of guys too. It's a mixture. So it's not a good answer. I mean, that's maybe part of it, but I think there's more to it. So, again, like I said at the beginning, turning to philosophers, or in this case, to poets. So what I'm going to do for this poem, and the poem is called Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey on Revisiting the Banks of the Wye During a Tour, July 13th, 1798. That's actually the name of the poem. And this is actually a rather famous poem by William Wordsworth, as some of you may know is my favorite poet. And this is the final poem, the concluding poem in his fantastic work of art called Lyrical Ballads. This is the book that essentially launched the English Romantic movement in England. So we're going to turn to this. We're going to discuss it and go through it. But before I read it to you and we discuss it a little bit, and then we discuss how it's relevant to reaction videos, which it is, I wanted to give you I thought it might be helpful to give you a synopsis of what's going on. Maybe that would help you in understanding it. And I say this about all the recordings that I do and about all poems, is that poems are meant to be reread. They're not meant to be read. So the first time you hear this, it's going to be very challenging. But if you speak English, if you read English, you can do it. And I'll give you some of the tools as we go through the second discussion of it, as we look through it a little bit closer. I'll give you some of the tools to use to kind of understand the poem and what's happening in the poem. And again, even when I read it over and over again, I read it again just recently, I was like, oh, there's new things, and I understand it on a different level. And that's something that happens all the time with great literature in general, but especially great poetry. And so if you understand very little of it at first, or any of it at all, that's fine. That's understandable. That's acceptable. There's nothing wrong with you. Stick with it. Just really give it a shot. And I think you will have a more profound understanding of something that could be a great value to you about, even if you don't like reaction videos, but why maybe you should try reaction videos, that there's a really great value and important thing you can get from them and learn from them and enjoy and gain more pleasure in your life because of reaction videos. So here's the synopsis of Tintern Abbey is the poem in short, but it's lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. I'll have this poem. I'm not going to read it quite yet, but I'll give you the synopsis first. Okay. So basically a poet returns to the site of a location that 5 years previous had a profound impact on him. And the site, the location is it says in the title, the banks of the Wye, were basically a hill that overlooks an abbey, like an old church, but in this case, Tintern Abbey, which is a kind of rundown. It's an abandoned church at this point. So he's coming back and he's revisiting. So he came there in 1793. And by the way, if you know about 1793, you know that that's a very important moment in European history. That is the reign of terror. That's, in France, and we have war between Britain and France. So this is a tumultuous time. And, so this author is talking about a time when he was younger and he's writing about, or he's experiencing something. And then he comes back and he's back to that same location. And I want you to think about you revisiting things that you've enjoyed in the past. Have you ever, we really got to go to Disneyland. I haven't been there since I was a kid. And you go back and it's like, you really want to enjoy that same experience. You want to kind of recapture that. You want to go recapture something from your youth. And, just to give you kind of a hint, sometimes you want to watch a movie that you love or a TV show you really, really enjoyed, and you want to experience it like it's the first time you experience it. So there's a little hint for you. So a poet returns to the site of the location after 5 years. And the next thing is, for all those years during those times, and this is described in the poem, but he elaborates on this a lot, of course. But during that 5 years, the images, the emotions, the sights, the smells, everything from that moment stayed in his mind's eye. He recalls all of this. He has it there. It's part of who he is during the 5 years that he's away from it. So when he's away from it, he goes back and he thinks about, oh yeah, I remember when I was on the Wye and in the, on that river, seeing the Abbey and during the Revolution. And there was this, moments of splendor and grandeur and the changing of the world. And he thinks about the sights and the scenes that he saw at that time during the 5 years he's gone. And he goes on to say, he's basically in times of hardship in his life, in sadness, when he's depressed, things are not going well, he'll stop and he'll think about those sights and images, and it will help him feel a little bit better. And now, returning, he feels again what he once felt. In the 5 years after when he returned, he's now back in 1798 after a 5-year hiatus from the Tintern Abbey, and he feels again what he felt 5 years ago. But it's dim. It's a faint feeling. He doesn't feel it as intensely as he did before. And you know what that means, right? You know what that's like. I mean, a simple example is you never have a first kiss twice with the one person, right? And there's something when you're in a relationship with for a long time with somebody, that the passion fades and you desperately want to have that again. You want that returning to you. You want to feel that first time. And you do that with a lot of experiences. The first time you're in a plane, the first time you visit a new country, the first time you meet someone you really like, or there's something deep in us that wants to revisit that, because that was an intense passion. I mean, you might have heard of people who fall in love with falling in love. And there's a reason. It's a very addictive thing. So he's sad now that he returned to this place. He felt the same emotions, but they're dim, they're faint, they're faded. It's not as intense as it once was. But his spirit will not decay. This is not a bad thing in his mind, because he's there with a good friend, his sister, in fact. And she's accompanying him, and she, in her first time experiencing this, reflects all the same emotions. It brings it all back for him. And it comes back and it's more intense. And he's like, oh, there it is. So that's a synopsis. Now, I'm going to read this. And again, I'm warning you, it's a little bit of a complicated poem, but give it a shot. Turn off, step away for a little while. Just listen. You don't have to read along if you don't want to. Get away, put your phone away, or if you're on your phone, then put on Do Not Disturb and listen, read, and then pause it and read the whole thing for yourself. And we're going to go through it again after I read it once to kind of get into it. But, if you want, you can just stop after I do the reading and just enjoy that part. Okay, so here again is the reading, and then we'll discuss and we'll talk a little bit about how it's related to reaction videos. So the poem title, Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of the Wee during a tour July 13th, 1798. 5 years have passed, 5 summers, with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs, that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day has come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season, with their unripe fruits, are clad in one green hue, and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral farms green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees. With some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure, such, perhaps, as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood, almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. While with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet, oh, how oft in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir of unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye? Thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee? And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. While here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed, no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams. Wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me all was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, and a love, that had no need of a remoter charm by thought supplied, not any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn nor murmur, other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou, my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend, and in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege, through all the years of this our life, to lead from joy to joy, for she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts, that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life shall e'er prevail against us, or disturb our cheerful faith, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Therefore, let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee. And in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion of all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. Oh, then if solitude, or fear, or pain, or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and these my exhortations? Nor, perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence. Wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service? Rather say with warmer love, no, with far deeper zeal of holier love. Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs, and this green pastoral landscape, were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. Okay. So, if you want to stop there, if you did listen this long, thank you for giving it a shot. I know it's complicated. I know there's probably a lot that went over your head. Honestly, a lot goes over my head even after reading it again. Like it's something where sometimes you just, you have to kind of look through it and find some passages you like and you understand. But I think there's a lot of deep thoughts and deep ideas going on here about a particular experience. So now we're going to go through it again, and we're going a little bit slower. Now, I'm not going to do a line-by-line discussion. I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible because it's such a long poem, and, I've actually done an analysis of this poem in the past, a more in-depth one, so you can go look at it, and I think it's like an hour or not 2 hours, something like that. It's a long one because this one can be really broken down, and it's been analyzed a lot, so you can find a lot on this if you want to understand more deeply and analyze this experience that Wordsworth is talking about. But again, I wanted to, point out a couple things as we go through. So remember we talked about the beginning, 5 years. So the poet's talking from his perspective that he's writing some lines. And he's writing lines and he starts off by saying 5 years ago, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And notice there's a kind of repetition of this again. And this happens throughout the whole poem, this kind of emphasis on the fact that this is a secondary experience. He's doing that again. And again, I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. So he's giving also a description, a visual description through words, which, by the way, is one of the great values of literature, is to get a visual description of, through words of a visual experience, of this whole experience. Once again, he says, do I behold these steep and lofty hills that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts. So there's this whole emphasis throughout, which you can read, where he talks about impressions of the senses and the thoughts, that deep seclusion, like thoughtfulness happens. And he connects, there's a kind of integration and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. He's making connections and integrations and thinking about things. The day has come when I again repose. This is a returning. He's emphasizing this returning thing. The day has come when I again repose, lay down and relax here under this dark sycamore. So it's the same sycamore tree from 5 years ago, and view these plots of cottage land or cottage ground. So he's drawing the scene some more. So by the Abbey, he's on a hill overlooking this Abbey, this church, and there are cottages. These with little orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruit are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. And here he goes again. Once again, I see these hedgerows. I've seen all this before, he says. I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines, right? Like the lines he's writing. So like this is lines composed above Tintern Abbey. And he talks about the little hedgerows, which are like little lines because he's far away and he's looking down on it. He's getting this observational impression, but rather than, he's not looking in detail and specific on every little leaf. They look in broad scale, like lines. So there's a connection between the lines of this pen on paper and the lines of nature. These pastoral farms green to the very door. So imagine greenery all the way to the door of this cottage. And wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees. It sounds like a Thomas Kincaid painting. Look that up if you don't know who that is. With some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave where by his fire the hermit sits alone. So he's now drawing a connection between the image of a hermit sitting in a cave, kind of being more one with nature is what you might think of as a hermit too. Because he's just, he's away from civilization. Now he goes on in the second passage, and this is where we talked about, for all those years, the images are kind of implanted in his mind. He's going to talk about the forms, the images, the impressions and sensations. That's what this stanza is going to be about. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. Now that's an interesting thing to say, rather than a straightforward way of saying it. So, you have to, again, you're going to have to, if you want to read poetry, you have to use your brain. You got to think about this stuff. So these beauteous forms through a long absence have not been to me the way a landscape would be to a blind man's eye. What would a landscape be to a blind man's eye? Nothing, right? Like a landscape to a blind man's eye would be dark. It's not that way to him. So a blind man cannot see a landscape, so there's nothing there. The beauteous forms have not been like that. Now, why would you want to emphasize something like that or emphasize it in that way? I talk about that in my more long discussion of this. So I'll just say in a simplistic way that it forces, one reason to do this is it forces you to stop and to think about what he's saying. That's something that prose is not as good at. Prose is meant to help you flow through and continue on the logic of the statement, but poetry is meant to make you, but what? Huh? And read it again and again and again. That is part of it, because the reading of it again and again and again is the joy of it, and it impresses it on your mind in a different way than prose does. And then also by doing a negation in this way, have not been to me as a landscape to a blind man's eye. It allows you to say certain things that you may not be able to say. So it allows you to say that, to make the analogy or the comparison of a landscape to a blind man's eye, which is nothing. But you get to say it as though it is something by actually writing it in. And he goes on, but oft in lonely rooms amid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart. So again, all those images, they're pumping through and coursing through his body. That's the metaphor he's bringing here. And passing even into my pure mind. So he's like, the way his mind thinks now is because of all the images and the thoughts and the deep seclusion he had in the past. Feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps. So there's even something that he doesn't remember. There's a pleasure like, oh, I forgot about that pleasure. Oh my God, that's a great thing. Such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence of that best portion of a good man's life, his little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. So he's making another here homage to the hermit, living a good life by himself, essentially. That's another discussion for another time. We're going to move on because we're trying to look at this from a certain perspective. Nor less I trust to them I may have owed another gift of some aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this intelligible world is lightened. So he's talking here about the feeling of becoming better and feeling better because, having the weight lifted, living in an unintelligible world, and that weight is lightened for him. We're going to keep kind of going on. He talks about harmony and the deep power of joy. And there's a lot for you to read and, think about, what does he mean by this? What does he like? Do what I'm doing, but do it for every line, every sentence, and you will get joy out of this. Now, the next stanza, he says, if this be but a vain belief. Now, what do you think? You have to know what he's talking about, of what he means by vain belief. But I'll just tell you that part of it is he's talking about the belief of the medicinal, we might call it almost psychological power that these images have in lightening and making him feel better and giving him the kind of inspiration he needs to move on. Yet, oh, how oft in darkness. So he says, maybe it's a vain belief, but for me, how often in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir of unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart. So with all the bad stuff, remember, this is during the French and, the French and British are at war. It's the French Revolution. So all this craziness in the world's going on, have hung upon the beatings of my heart. How often in spirit have I turned to thee, O Sylvan, thou wanderer through the woods. How often has my spirit turned to thee, you? So this is again an emphasis. He's pausing to emphasize more about this returning theme that we get and the feeling you get when you return and you try to experience that same thing again. And then he goes on, and now with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. So part of what he's talking about in this whole poem is he's gaining a mastery over his own mind because of all the process and the deep thinking he's doing about his emotions, his experiences, and the natural world around him where he is. Well, here I stand not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. So, there can be a literal way where he's like, I'm in a better position financially, but he's also, I think, saying in another way, there's the kind of food for thought idea, right? Like he's got all these pleasing thoughts that will feed him in the future. And so I dare to hope, though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills. So he's hoping, but he knows that 5 years, now he's, I think, like 29. He was like 24 or 5 when he was first here, that he's changed from when he first came here. When like a roe, like a baby deer, a young deer, when like a roe, that's him, by the way. He's the roe. He's the baby deer he was that 5 years ago. I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads. That's what he was like before, is he was running from something rather than trying to achieve something, and running towards something, flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days, to me was all in all. Nature was everything to him. And then he goes into this, and I don't have time to just, go into every line, every word here, but this is such a beautiful passage. Just read it aloud. It's one of the more famous passages of this whole thing. A cataract is a waterfall, by the way. So hear the sound of a waterfall here. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountains, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their form, were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, not any interest unborrowed from the eye, not any interest unborrowed from the eye. It's great, right? Like interest, like interest. This is not charging an interest. There's something that he's getting from this, nevertheless. That time is, and by the way, if anybody likes, if you're listening to this and you enjoy the poet, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and the poem Ulysses, you might hear some very similar resonance. The way that this flows and the way that even the images that he's using. Tennyson was a great admirer of William Wordsworth and learned a lot from him. In fact, I don't think you get a Tennyson without a Wordsworth. Okay, sorry for that distraction. So we're going to move on. So he's getting something that's unborrowed from the eye. You can watch my other video for more detail on that. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. So he's saying that all that feeling he just talked about with passion, with the sounding cataract that haunted him, and all the deep emotions he felt, that time is past. That 5 years where he felt what he felt 5 years ago, the aching joys. I mean, if you've ever been in intense, passionate love, it's an ache. It's a dizzy rapture. That's no more for him. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. He's not mourning the faintness of his self. Other gifts have followed. He gets something else. He gets something from this. The word he uses is recompensed. For such loss, I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on, this is the recompense that he gets. This is what he's getting from losing the aching joy of passion that he had in the past. I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth. Sorry, youthful people. But hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity. He sees something deeper in what he learned, and he calls it the still sad music of humanity, the overarching symphony of all of human existence, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. I mean, I think that's a really great line. And I have felt a presence. He feels a presence that disturbs him. And think about disturbs has a couple of different meanings here. Like it disturbs me, like, oh, that's a disturbing image. Why'd you show me that image? But also it's like, why are you disturbing me? Right? But I think he's using it for both senses. Sign of a great poet, using multiple senses in one line, that all the senses are actually the correct answer to what how he's using this term, this word. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thought. So he's disturbed by this, and there's a joy to it, and he's getting elevated thoughts. Just a lot going on here. A sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns. By the way, again, to the Tennyson thing, Tennyson has used that line. He's basically stolen that one a couple times. But whose dwelling is the light of setting suns in the round ocean and the living air and the blue sky and in the mind of man. And this is the part of that symphony of the visuals, the impressions, because we all see the same thing, but we all have different impressions of how we see it. But there's still underlying all of those impressions. There's a unifying nature to everything and all man's emotion, and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Yes, we all see this tree, and all of us see it from different perspectives, but there's a unifying thought nevertheless. There's something that unifies all of it to the way that the mind processes. He doesn't have all the language. He doesn't understand it quite fully, but Wordsworth is there trying to say that there's something fantastically unique about the human mind that processes all of this differently and yet the same. Therefore, because of this truth, this universal truth he has come to, am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, and of all the mighty world of eye and ear, the mighty world of eye and ear, yes. Both what they half create and what perceive, right? So we could talk about that kind of whole theory of knowledge right there. Well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. A lot going on. We're going to move on though. Now there's the last stanza where he talks about his sister. Remember, now he had this whole profound conclusions about how things are dimmer than the feeling he had 5 years earlier, that intense passion he felt during the revolution. It's dim now. It's dim. Ugh, sad, right? But he's recompensed with a philosophical mind that can think more. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. So he would, if he hadn't thought it through more. But he says, for you are with me here upon the banks of this fair river. Because you're with me, you, thou, my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend, and in your voice, I catch the language of my former heart and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I once was. That to me is the secret of why we love reaction videos, because we get to catch the language of your own former heart. What makes you are the conclusions, the emotions, all subterraneously in your mind, making conclusions and drawing observations that come up to new emotional experiences that you have. And you have them often with not only observations about, when you watch the news or you read a history book, or you meet a person that says something and you're like, why does this person act this way? And you have a conclusion about them. But a lot of times these conclusions, these emotional experiences are through art or through nature. If you can also do it in nature too. And I think that you should. That's what Wordsworth's saying. But it's also, this is the universal thing about reaction videos, is that when you watch a movie that really has an impact on you, like Band of Brothers had a really big impact on me. I had a tremendous respect and admiration, and it was so well done, and the journey that all those men went on, and coming from where I went from, where pretty much every male in my lineage was in a war, fought in a war, except for me. I have an understanding of but for the grace of God go I, which is why I have such a deep appreciation for this, because I didn't have to go through that, because they did. And I love that whole story because it's such a deep understanding that I have about the world that we live in and the kind of men that made this freedom possible, and that, but for the grace of God, I didn't have to do that. And so I love that show. And so when if you're my friend, or if, I would love to share that with my friends. And if they haven't seen it, I want to watch it, not only have them watch it, although I hope that they'll watch it and then come talk to me about it, and we can share. I can kind of catch some of the former pleasures and the shooting lights of their wild eyes. But even better is to sit next to them and watch them. Now, this could be very uncomfortable for people, but you have done this. If you've ever been with other humans, if you're not an actual hermit, is you have been on a date with a girl and or a guy, or if you're just hanging out with a friend and you're watching a movie you love and you've seen it 10 times, you don't need to see it again. And so you kind of look over at them and a moment's about to come on. It's like, are you paying attention? You paying attention? And they're looking at your phone. You're like, oh, you're so disappointed that you missed the most important part. Oh. But there are times, and this has happened to me quite often because I only hang out with people who have the same sense of life as me. It's true. And, I look over and they do have similar reactions. Not every time, not 100% accurate. Sometimes their reactions actually make me appreciate a scene I didn't even appreciate before until then. They actually enhance it. That's why we love reaction videos so much. That's why they get millions of views, is because when something happens to Hodor in Game of Thrones, you had a feeling when that happens. You're like, a feeling of dread happens, something going on, and then something happens, and then you watch it, and then that's over, and it fades from you. And even if you watch it again by yourself, it's never gonna. It's gonna happen, so it doesn't. But when you watch someone in a reaction video, it's just exactly the same feeling because they're going through it for the first time. Oh. Yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, like that, and I can feel it again. That's why we love. And in after years, when these wild ecstasies, now he's talking to her about when the same thing happens to her next time she goes to Tintern Abbey. When these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, like they have been for me. When your mind shall be a mansion, great metaphor for the mind, for all lovely forms, all the things you see, the trees, the plants, the river, the abbey, the cottages, with all the images he's been talking about, those lovely forms are going to be in your mind. They're folders in your mind, but they're stored in the mansion of your mind. Shall be a mansion for all lovely forms. Thy memory, your memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. Oh, then if solitude or fear or pain or grief should be thy portion, your portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me? And these are my exhortations. The poet John Keats called Wordsworth the poet of the egotistical sublime. Here's an example. It's like, oh, so, when I have this experience, it's me, of course, because I'm William Wordsworth. When you have it, you're going to also think of me because I'm William Wordsworth. Like, that's basically, I think, what he's saying. You're going to, of what healing thoughts of tender joy will thou remember me? And these, my exhortations, these lines written above Tintern Abbey. Nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, if he's dead. Nor if I cannot be there to catch the wild eyes, these gleams, catch from your wild eyes these gleams of past existence. Wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together? Will you forget? And that I, so long a worshiper of nature, here came unwearied in that service? Are you going to forget what I did for you? Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs and this green pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. So he loves it because of its own, he loves it because it's nature and it's beautiful, and he loves the scene and everything, and it means to him. And it means to him not just objectively in reality, like naked, separated from his senses, but because of the process that, his mind went through to accomplish all of the forms that he has in his own mind mansion. That's why he loves it. But he also loves it because of her, that she helped him re-experience it. If he had gone to the Tintern Abbey and done a journey by himself without his sister, who he loves, he wouldn't have had this experience. He would have had a completely different experience, and he would not have relived it in this way. And that's why that's the real reason we love reaction videos. It's because we get to experience it as though it's the first time. We get to catch the wild eyes of someone they're watching something, they're enthralled, and it's something that enthralled you, and you have a deep connection with this person. These people that I watch, I can't help but have a real, even though I've never met them or talked to them, just a profound experience of connection. And I'll tell you, when I think about the connections in real life, the friendships and the romantic, partners and lovers I've had in the past, this is an important part of it, is, finding those things you connect over like this. And it's not, I wouldn't say that as a final thought here, that everything you're going to like, they're going to like in the same way. If you look for that, that's probably, maybe not, but probably a mistake. However, you should have some of it. You should have some things that you really love and that you guys connect over, and you can. And I think most of you probably know that, but I think that's the secret to why reaction videos are so popular. So I know I kind of skimmed through that pretty quickly. There's a lot to discuss, but it's already been 50 minutes. This is, me. I was trying to keep it under 45. So I hope you enjoyed that. Tell me any comments about, why, if you watch reaction videos, which reaction videos do you like and what are your favorites? And, hopefully you'll keep enjoying reaction videos. Or if you haven't watched many reaction videos, go find your favorite movie and go back and rewatch it with someone on YouTube. Till next time.